If a listener at a technology or compliance department within a bank wants to take one concrete step towards more secure, trusted communications, what would you recommend that they do?
Focus on control and security of whoever is providing the communication service to you.
How do you view the need to go over and above minimum viable?
These are both verification processes for, say, security standards and InfoSec standards for technology providers in particular, but others as well. And in our industry, it's really important for customers to check that you are providing things in a safe and secure way and that you have good processes.
I can see a certification standard around that.
Yes.
There are certifications and then there are certifications, and not all are accredited.
It's really kind of surprising that you don't have to be accredited in order to provide these certifications. It's a bit the same as if you had a financial audit performed by, Bob down the street.
And it's of zero value. Corinna, welcome. Thank you very much for doing this. For the benefit of the viewers, perhaps you could give a little introduction about yourself.
Right, so I'm Corinna Mitchell and I'm the General Counsel of Symphony, and I'm also on the executive team. I joined Symphony 5 years ago in January, so that's quite a long time. And what we do is provide communication services to the financial industry.
I've always viewed Symphony as kind of at the core of communications for global finance. And then, of course, we have WhatsApp and off-channel problems, which have featured over the last few years. When you look back at those, how do you think that the WhatsApp and off-channel fines have made clients view Symphony?
That's a great question. And I think that the fines have definitely provided a real sense of urgency for our clients in relation to off-channel communications. So just taking a step back, using WhatsApp and SMS to communicate with your end customers or end clients is generally not permitted if it can't be recorded and monitored. Depends what your function is if you're working in a bank or an asset manager. But if you use them and they're not recorded and they're not checked, then you're probably breaking one of the requirements of your boss's regulator. So in the last 5 years, particularly in the US, there's been a real crackdown on use of off-channel, by which we mean not compliant communications. And there's been some really, really large fines, particularly in the US. Again, I think it's in the hundreds of millions, maybe even more billions of dollars worth of fines.
$3 billion, I think, in the last 36 months.
Yes, that's a very large amount of money, and it definitely focuses people's minds on what to do in relation to what were previously off-channel communications. And so some customers, it's interesting, people have a range of responses. Some clients would like to ban use of non-recorded communications altogether, by which I mean ban use of WhatsApp, ban use of SMS or anything similar. And that is a very difficult thing to enforce, because if you're working in a financial services business, your end user, your client needs to get hold of you quickly. What are you going to do? Do you force them off the channel to something else that's perhaps less convenient? That's what you'd have to do if you were banned. Or is there a way that you can actually use modern communication technology and meet your clients where they need to be met and still meet your regulatory requirements? So that's why we have our services, what we call federation services, which allow customers to use Symphony and WhatsApp, or Symphony and SMS, Symphony and Line, or Symphony and WeChat, in order to record those conversations, make sure they're captured, and therefore help to meet their compliance requirements.
I'm not sure that the banning a channel has ever really worked. As you say, I think I remember there was one of the fines. I felt very sorry for the banker who also got personally fined. It wasn't just the firm. He got personally hit with a fine. It was over in the US. It was over WhatsApp. And I remember reading the transcripts, and I felt very sorry for him because a customer on the other end was putting huge pressure on him. He was saying, if you want my business, you have to communicate with me the way I want to communicate. And that's how he got caught out. It was so the bank had tried to ban it, but the pressure from the customer was too great. And the trader was just, he got caught out. I felt very sorry for him.
And they're between a rock and a hard place in those circumstances. But we do have the technological capability to sort this out and to make it possible. So that's the good news, is that it is possible. And a lot of our clients have actually found that if they come to us, they have a plan in place and they have a rollout proposed, then it will go much better for them with regulators. So that's also important.
Yeah, true. And so once you've captured all of this content, so you've got all of the internal comms, the symphony to symphony conversations, and now through federation, external channel conversations, you've got all of this communication data. How do you at Symphony get insight out of that content?
So we don't see our clients' content. That's one of the really important aspects of the service we provide. So it's not in the clear, it's not available to us. And so we personally don't get any insight out of it. And unless our clients want us to do analytics for them, we don't do that, but they are able to do that. And I think it's important to note that we don't see the content because there are some other providers out there that don't have the same security, and you may have seen what we call Signalgate. Signalgate in the US, where, say, perhaps the US was sending military instructions through Signal and then used something else to try to capture the signal so that they could record it and be compliant with their own requirements, but it wasn't secure. So it is really important that we don't see the content. But clients can do a lot with the communication if they want to, and that involves them using analytic tools on the communications that they capture through Symphony.
What tools do you give customers?
We enable them to extract their data well, and so that they can do the analytics themselves. With our partnership with Umony, they have the capacity to apply very advanced analytics into the environment and to look for, say, compliance flags. And a lot of our other analytics tools that we're developing at the moment are around voice transcription for our trader voice. So that enables customers to get their data set, which is completely unstructured from a voice perspective, and actually gain very valuable insights into their trading activity. And again, to do so in a way that we don't get to see the data. So we have to give them the analytics tools, deploy them into the product, but make sure that the information is just proprietary for the client and not available to us.
Doing it the right way is not easy. It takes a lot of time and effort.
Absolutely. And I think that's obviously one of the things that we see with AI, and the concerns around AI are the confidentiality. So one must always check confidentiality of any AI tool that people use. And then the other thing is obviously the ability to check accuracy. I think they're, from a financial services perspective, the two biggest concerns one would have about use of analytics and AI. And there are some use cases where it's not so important to always have 100% accuracy because you are just using it to gain insights, or you're not necessarily executing on the basis of that information. But the confidentiality is absolutely a plus and a necessary in every single instance.
I completely agree. And actually, I think the human in the loop is still very much required at the moment because of the hallucination and other issues, which, as you say, would be a bit of a disaster if something was going off automatically and undertaking work on the basis of something that had just hallucinated.
Yeah, so that's why I think from a compliance and capture perspective, analytics is really powerful because you can always check it, and you can tolerate some false positives and false negatives because you can go back to the original source and check it. Mm-hmm. And the AI is probably nevertheless more accurate than a human checking. So it's a good use case.
And it has scale. So it can peruse 100% of a batch of content where a human might only be able to do a very small percentage of it. So that's
Yes.
its key advantage, I think.
I think at the moment, I'm not 100% sure, but the general target for surveillance on, say, voice trading is about 10% of what's happening. And that's aimed at a human-style scale. Still pretty considerable for many businesses, but if you have a good analytics or AI service that can look at 100% exactly as you said, Dean, you can definitely tolerate some inaccuracy because you can always check it.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good point. As you say, 10%, it's a good effort to get to that point, but effectively you're still leaving 90% that's not being looked at.
Yeah.
As General Counsel, how do you draw the line between analytics of the type we've just discussed and the need for transparency and explainability with and auditability, if that is a word, with customers and regulators?
That's a great question. And one of the challenges with AI is that explainability and auditability. And it's something that we look at all the time at Symphony when we're incorporating AI into our products and services. So the auditability is extremely difficult. There is an ISO that relates to AI, which is 42,100, but not so many AI providers have it, to my knowledge. And it's a good start. I don't think it's everything. So it's the sort of auditability is very difficult, and you have to also look at the bona fides of the provider. What do you think of them? How do you understand about their business processes generally? What's your level of belief in the way that they go about things? And explainability, again, they're never going to be able to give you an accuracy output statistic. I think it's changing all the time, and it's very hard to even say, well, our AI is 90% accurate or whatever. So it's about explaining how the model works and how the AI process works in big picture terms, and to have an understanding of that. But beyond that, it's very hard to actually really be sure. And we have that with our own use of AI for internal work systems. We wanted to check something on a model that we use. And we said we can put in as many tests to see what the output are, but it may give you a different answer each time. And so ultimately we are then thrown back to, well, what are the contractual promises? What is the auditability that they've provided? What is the verification that they've provided? And how thorough do we think that they are based on our business knowledge and examination?
It's a really difficult black box to kind of unbox, isn't it? I've always felt that if we look at, you mentioned the ISO standards, which we'll come on to in a minute, but if we look at something like ISO 27001 for InfoSec, which is now pretty standard, you have to have it. It's kind of hygiene factor one, a very important one. That, for me, always represented a company de-black boxing itself in terms of its business process from an information security point of view. So rather than having everything opaque and customers not being able to see your processes, it's transparency, and you have a complete set of documentation. Customers often ask to see it, to say, here's how we operate as a business. And I've always liked that as a kind of a transparency thing. How you do that with a large language model is really hard. And it's hard to make it look like anything other than a magic black box at the moment.
I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about the certifications. You've mentioned ISO 42001, 27001, there's SOC 2. As General Counsel, how do you view the need to go over and above minimum viable? I mean, if we look at ISO 27001 SOC 2, for example, you could argue they're kind of achieving the same thing. Maybe having one is enough. How do you view it?
So that's a great question. And just taking a step back, I think, for our audience members, these are both verification processes for, say, security standards and InfoSec standards for technology providers in particular, but others as well. And in our industry, it's really important for customers to check that you are providing things in a safe and secure way and that you have good processes. So SOC 2 is much more common in North America, and it's more of an audit-based process. and it's done generally every year. And ISO 27001, there's a lot of numbers there for the ISOs. ISO 27001 is more about processes, policies, and systems. And so I think it's useful to have both if you have a mature provider, a mature vendor, because the SOC 2 is more specifically audit, but it can have a different, more narrow scope. And the ISO 27001 is about processes and policies and is generally a bit broader in scope. And so it is very useful to have both from any vendor.
So would you say you would go a little bit further than you need to with those certifications in order to help the market understand that you're a trustworthy partner?
We want to have the right certifications and the right credentials that will convince our clients that we do things the right way and that we're built and robust for financial services who have one of the highest needs of requirement. And so we also recognise we have clients all around the world. So if you're in the US, you probably want a SOC 2. If you're in Europe or the UK, you might look more at ISO certification. And we have clients who really want to understand what's going on. So if we didn't have sufficient certifications by a third party, then we would have clients asking us, each of them asking us to provide all this information to them or wanting to do their own audits. And that is just not going to be effective for us or for them. So yes, we really do strive to seek out good standards that we can adhere to beyond perhaps what is the minimum necessary to show that we really are built for financial services and robust.
Absolutely. And you also, on your website, you call out DORA.
Yes.
And data privacy frameworks. How do you feel about being DORA ready? Do you think that most of your clients are DORA ready?
No.
Interesting.
They're getting close.
Getting close. Yeah, I asked, we had Stephen Sanders on here, who's former Chief Compliance Officer, JP Morgan. He said he didn't think that the industry was ready as a whole. And in fact, the regulators have said a similar thing to me. They don't think they're ready.
And you have to bear in mind that DORA came into force in January this year, so January 2025, but a number of the detailed implementing regulations were not in force when DORA came into force, which is a difficult position to be in because you don't know the detail of what you're meant to do because it's not actually in force. So there is that element for financial institutions or financial entities, as they're called under DORA, that not all the detail was provided when it came into force. So there's been more of a step approach, and informally people have been telling me that their regulators say, well, you need to have your register of vendors, critical providers by this date, and you need to have your contract remediation by that date. And to take a risk-based approach, what are your most critical suppliers, for example, or which aspects are most critical for your business? Focus on them first and then do the other parts next.
That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. So it's actually quite a collaborative process between regulator and firm.
Well, there's always a dialogue, particularly between the largest institutions and their national regulators. So you have to pick how you're going to implement it when you can't do it all in a big bang. But talking about DORA, I didn't answer your question on how did we approach helping our clients be ready for DORA, because to be clear, DORA is a responsibility of the financial entities, our clients. So we knew it was coming, of course, and looked very closely at our processes and also our contracts, because that's one of the requirements of DORA, is that there are minimum requirements for contracts with financial entities if you're a supplier, basically a technology supplier. And we knew it was coming, and we looked really closely at our program, our contracts, and got ourselves ready in advance. And we also took the decision that we would support every client who wanted to designate us as critical or important, so to achieve the highest level of DORA compliance in our contracts and our services, even if it wasn't always required for our clients. So we did, again, take that approach of what might a client reasonably need or want. Let's just go there and not mess about with lesser requirements.
I would have thought for most of your customers, your critical infrastructure. Sorry, can I not go there?
You can. It's an interesting question, Dean, and I think it depends on the institution. They choose whether any supplier is critical.
They determine it. Right.
They determine it, and it really depends how they use the system. And because we have so much flexibility in the way that we can provide services to different customers, there are some that might not think that we are critical. When you look at the definition, it's sort of about their ability to meet regulations or a financial impact on the way that they function. So it is possible for each different client to determine a different level of criticality. But a lot of ours have said that we are critical for them.
I can imagine that, yeah. And how far through supply chain does that go? So do you look at operational resilience across your supply chain, so your partners as well as in your own internal processes?
We
and
do
systems?
have to. And so, again, this is a little bit technical, but under DORA, if we are a critical or important supplier to our clients, then we have to have obligations with our supply chain as well, our critical or important subcontractors. So it is important that there's a level of proportionality, and you have to look at who is critical. So someone that delivers the snacks to our London office is not a critical subcontractor. But, for example, our cloud hosting providers are, and then you have to basically put in place the same sorts of protections with those suppliers, those critical or important suppliers or subcontractors, as you provide to your own client. So it's that supply chain knock-on effect is perhaps the one that's going to take the very longest to work its way through all the different providers.
And so tying that back to certifications, audited certifications like ISO, SOC 2, how do you view your partners, vendors to you, part of that overall supply chain of Symphony in terms of their certifications? How important are those to you?
For the critical ones, very important indeed. So we're actually normally in our contracts, we say that our critical suppliers must have the sort of the ISO 27001 or equivalent in order for us to engage them. And so they are extremely important. And then we will look at them and analyse the findings as well, make sure that they keep being recertified.
And I'm aware, and I know you're aware, that there are certifications and then there are certifications, and not all are accredited. And how do you validate across your supply chain those certifications that you're presented with?
Well, it's a great point, Dean. It is very important to check that any certificate that one is presented with is actually provided by an accredited person, someone with the real expertise and recognition to provide that certification. And there's all sorts of reasons why. Part of it is that they know what they're doing. Part of it is that they perhaps have the appropriate backup and liability to support what they're certifying. And then to make sure that they're accredited is to actually make sure that what you're getting is worth the paper it's written on.
I agree. And we were talking before recording, and I learned this morning actually that the FCA in its handbook, its supplier handbook, talks about having a supply chain having those certifications, particularly talking about ISO 27001. But there's nothing in there that says it needs to be accredited, which I think causes a bit of a gap.
Definitely. It's a bit the same as if you had a financial audit performed by, Bob down the street.
Exactly.
It's really kind of surprising that you don't have to be accredited in order to provide these certifications. So that's definitely a tip for everyone is check the accreditation of the provider of any certification on which you're relying. It's extremely important because there are people that are not accredited who will do it.
I agree. I think the responsibility is on the buyer to do due diligence. It's buyer beware. But I think I sort of see a bit of a gap where some kind of legislation could help to make it, maybe if there were an official certificate that was where it would be clear it would be a forgery. There would be an illegality around, rather at the moment it's a bit of a grey area, right? Because as you say, I could certify you for ISO 27001. I could say you apply all the right procedures and policies. I could print you out a pretty little certificate saying Dean says, and it's of zero value. Whereas if there were a formal certificate or certification process, then it would become illegal if I tried to forge that.
It's such an interesting question, Dean, and I think analogously to auditors and lawyers, of course, being a lawyer. And so if you want to consult a lawyer, and we have legal opinions that we provide as well, which can be very useful to people, there's a register or a bar roll or the equivalent. You can see, is that person actually qualified to give you that advice? The same with auditors. You can check if someone is actually a proper accountant, basically. And we rely so heavily on these sorts of certifications now without any verification in the same sort of way. So perhaps there is something that says that we should elevate it to an almost professional level because it's so important to our supply chain, and regulators are really focusing on resiliency in key sectors. And this is an important part of verifying resiliency. Then the person that is doing the verification is not just, well, buyer beware. Actually, we should have something that is more robust. And that's a good question. I think we'll probably get there one day.
Yeah, no, it's a great point about lawyers and auditors and accountants and other professional bodies. It's actually very easy to check. I can phone the Law Society, find out if someone's admitted on the roll. I think even if they were formally, but they haven't renewed their practice certificate, you can find that out. It's actually much harder to do that across these certification standards.
Yeah, there are some resources that you can use to find out whether someone is accredited. So in the UK, we have UCAS, which is the United Kingdom accreditation. What is it?
We'll put it on the screen.
Yes, we'll put it on the screen. So that's very helpful that UCAS. You can check at UCAS, so UKAS. And then obviously there's the IAF, which is the International Accreditation Federation as well. So there are a few different places that you can go to check, but it's not the same as having an official sort of register. And that would never, I think, apply multinationally, but if you could at least check on a national level, it would be a good start.
Yeah, certainly. I think the UCAS one, there's a cert check. Again, we'll put a link for anyone who wants to go and have a look. But in there, you can search any UK company name and find a list of all of the official accredited certifications that they have. It's a useful resource and it's freely available. So it is actually getting easier to do that due diligence, even though it's imperfect at the moment.
And just thinking about resiliency, an interesting note, because we were talking about DORA before, is that there is a proposal and an examination under DORA as to whether auditors should be brought into the DORA regime, so whether they themselves would need to have the same level of operational resiliency and technological safety that financial entities would, as a recognition of how important their role is in checking and certifying, we'd say, financial health. It is interesting that we see this getting broader and broader, and the importance of checking and verification.
So a bank customer comes to Symphony and it's doing its due diligence. How do you frame that resilient story as one story where Symphony is presenting not just itself, but its supply chain as well? Most banks aren't going to want to go and do due diligence themselves throughout that supply chain. How do you package that up for the customer?
So it's a really good question, and it is under the spotlight with renewed focus as a result of DORA and other resiliency regulations that are coming into force. The first thing is that most financial services clients will insist that you, the supplier that they face, are responsible for all the actions of your subcontractors or the suppliers to you. So you have to take responsibility from a contractual and product perspective for your clients, which puts the onus on us to be very careful. There are also special focuses on the really key subcontractors, and clients will want to know who they are. So cloud service providers, for example, and if you want to move one of those, you have to do it in a particular way. So you have to give lots of notification to your clients. You have to help them normally go through any clearances that they need. Sometimes they will have to have regulatory clearance to have a different cloud provider for their service provider. So the web is quite complicated. So you need lots of notice. You need to give them lots of information. You have to have done your due diligence and be able to answer questions about it to the clients if you need to. You need to let them choose a number of different aspects for some of your key suppliers, such as data locality. So you need to choose someone that can help them find the right data locality for their data to be stored. And you ultimately also have to keep verifying and checking that they are doing what they need to do and that they are of a good enough quality to supply to you. So there's many different aspects to that. It's quite a complicated question.
It is a complicated question. It's interesting to unpick it. And actually, you mentioned cloud providers there. Are you seeing, on the resilience point, are you seeing any desire in the market for businesses like Symphony going multi-cloud?
So that is a really good question. It's actually very difficult in a technological sense to be multi-cloud for the same product across different providers, because you almost end up supporting two products because of the different security requirements for each different cloud and the different technological architecture for the different clouds. So we don't think that we would ever be multi-cloud for one product across multiple different cloud providers in any real scalable way. And you wouldn't be able to just switch one customer who's on one cloud system in the event of an outage to a completely different cloud system. And so what we prefer to think of is multi-region failover. And I think that's the best way of doing it. There's an interesting tension between providing multi-region failover and also specific data locality. So more and more clients and their regulators are saying you must have your data reside in your local jurisdiction, wherever that might be. And that's all fine and dandy until you have an outage in that region, and then your client wants their service to work, which multi-region failover would permit if it's technologically possible, but then the data moves somewhere else. So I think that's something I see as a tension in regulatory requirements. Resiliency is actually sometimes opposed to data locality.
Yeah, we're seeing this right now in the UK within AWS. So AWS it has multiple zones within the UK. But if you want a multi-region service, you need, assuming you want to be geographically close to a customer, you need one cloud in the UK and one in the EU. Now, at the moment, GDPR and other privacy laws, the UK and the EU are aligned. But that could now change post-Brexit, and maybe they become disaligned at some point, in which case geographical resilience kind of impossible for an island nation like England.
Yeah, so we have clients around the world in many different places, and some of them will say that their regulator insists on the cloud servers because we know that it's not actually in the cloud. They're a physical servers.
There's a building somewhere, yeah.
But it's not so obvious to everyone that they require the cloud servers to be in that locality. And there are lots of implications from that. One is cost. It's expensive every time you open with a provider a new locality, and it costs them as well. And then there's also this resiliency issue of not being able to have multi-region failover or having it anyway and perhaps not fully complying with the locality requirements. And so we think that that's a rather old-fashioned way of viewing the integrity and accessibility of data. And we would push regulators to think beyond that and to think more about who can access it, who controls the keys, how retrievable is it, and how secure is that cloud. They should be the things I think that regulators are focusing on.
I agree. The other thing that feeds into that conversation is energy. And energy good energy governance, and having multi-region is great. But if you're basically doubling everything, which is you should, in a way, if you really want true multi-region resilience, you're effectively doubling your energy consumption, which is not a great thing.
And from a geopolitical perspective, also perhaps not so wise.
Right.
So it's a really interesting question. But of course, it's thrown into relief every time we have a big outage, such as the October 20 AWS East region outage, where a huge number of businesses, even here in the UK, found that they were very impaired by that outage, and that includes banks. And people here were asking questions, well, how is it that one of our banks is so reliant on a US instance of a US cloud provider? So it does raise a lot of very interesting big picture questions.
Yeah, the big fluffy cloud in the sky in reality is just another black box for a lot of people.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, you thinking in terms of governance, so regulatory governance, or
there's upcoming is the Cyber Resilience Act, which is an EU act that it's staggered, but it will come into force fully in 2027, and that has quite a broad application to the providers of products and technological products as to how they build resiliency into their services. So if you can think of DORA as being focused on resiliency for the financial services sector, very specific, an important backbone of our economy and even infrastructure, you might say now. The Cyber Resilience Act is much broader, and it covers almost any sort of manufactured technological product and the requirements there. And they're fairly strict. They're almost product level, product safety requirements. So that's an interesting thing to see. And again, I think that will mean that we need better standards and better verification. And then also you have in the US, CISA has also proposed reporting requirements for 16 covered industries for cyber incidents. And whilst it's not fully about operational resilience from a governance perspective, it definitely focuses on what happens if things go wrong and reporting and verification. So we're seeing this as a big trend around the world. And of course, part of that is from an industry perspective, do we have to have all sorts of different reporting requirements, and do we have to have different standards that apply around the world? That's very difficult. If you serve clients that are around the world, what you actually want is some unification. You want some harmonization of those tests, reporting requirements, and audit requirements. So I think it's really important to say that we should try to have common standards that we can adhere to for understandability for people, so that they can understand what it means, and for ease of reporting for those that have to provide it. And then just finally, for information sharing and gathering, it's much better if you have common standards.
And verification becomes simpler as well.
Absolutely.
Who is lobbying for that now, that harmonization, as you put it? Because it's a no-brainer, right? We should have global international standards, but we don't. Is anyone lobbying for it?
It's industry by industry. I think
Our industry, so financial services, do you see anyone?
it's not so obvious. It's not so obvious.
Yeah. I wonder whether that's something that we should be picking up with, maybe with the FCA here or the SEC in the US.
It's something that when people have conversations one-on-one, when they're regulated in multiple different places, they will say, we would expect that, say, the US, Europe and the UK could try to have something standard. They're very big markets and somewhat similarly set up. Obviously, there's a lot of variation, but for key standards, to have the same certifications, the same verifications, the same reporting requirements, or very similar, just makes so much more sense. So people mention it. No one national regulator would ever want to cede that. But anyway, it's
right.
I think you could also say that the EU likes to get there first and set the standards if possible. Yeah,
that's true. I think also I'm remembering now on data privacy, there are some challenges. So, for example, there used to be a Safe Harbor Act between UK and the US until a US judge said, hang on a minute, that's a nonsense. It's impossible. You can't comply with both because under UK as it was then, the UK rules as they were then, unless they may even be the same now. But there was if I hold data for you, I'm not allowed to give it to anyone unless there's a judge's order stating I have to, something like that. Whereas in the US, the intelligence services have the ability to extract that data from you without a court order. And I remember a judge, the Safe Harbor Act was effectively repealed because this judge was saying it's just a nonsense. They're so different. The US and the UK treat confidentiality and privacy so differently, it's impossible to comply with both. I wonder whether we're going to have that type of a problem here where harmonization just isn't possible.
It is possible, and then you just have to comply with multiple standards and reporting requirements, and that is so inefficient. I think as far as resiliency goes, though, we don't have those deep-held, sort of almost encrusted views about what security services can and can't do, because we're starting fairly fresh with these operational resiliency rules and reporting requirements and so on. So we don't have quite as much to deal with as far as inbuilt differences. So I'm more hopeful that if people have a will to do it and it's a new area, we can get there. I would just say, coming back to the privacy point, there were also lots of other Schrems cases that said that you can't rely on equivalency and so on. But what we've got to is something we call standard contractual clauses, so that we can allow, with consent and information and transparency, the flow of data where it needs to go to get service delivered, whilst also providing protections. And on the whole, most governments around the world have regulations on privacy that are pretty similar now to GDPR. So you can make it work. And that's why I say the EU likes to get there first, because it
likes to set
the standard, and then by default a lot of other places will have to comply.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing a lot of countries around the world follow what Europe does, so they have their leadership position naturally. So you think at the moment it's fairly smooth running in terms of that harmonization. It's not one process or system or certification body, but actually it's workable and it's not that bad.
Yes.
Inefficient, but workable.
Yes, and I think when we get to incident reporting, and if it's brought in the US, the CERCIA rules, then they will be fairly different to what, say, financial institutions are required to report under DORA. So then there will be differences, and it will be probably, I would expect, I think that the reporting form under DORA is more detailed, so I expect that people will mostly use that, and then just have something that pulls it if they had to do a report in the US as well. But that's just a guess.
So across the 4 platforms that you have, so messaging, voice with Cloud9, directory and analytics, how do you see the next 3 to 5 years for you across that whole stack?
So that's a great question. And we see the importance of adding analytics and allowing our clients to use the directory as really important. So adding analytics into everything that they do in a way that our clients are happy with confidentiality and they're happy with the explainability would really help them power up all that data that flows through Symphony and all of our products. So that's a really key focus, is making sure that we can allow our clients to capture, analyze, and then utilize some really important business information. So that's definitely part of it. Another way that we continue to expand is looking at interoperability, in fact, and allowing our products to be interoperable as much as possible, so that people don't have context switching, so that we can help solve a problem, a workflow problem for them, which interoperability is really an important part of. So we talked about our federation products, which is SMS, WhatsApp, Line, WeChat, to allow people to communicate over those channels and then still capture and record. That's an interoperation, if you like, with a different platform. And so we are constantly looking at other interoperations. How can we bring in important data into the Symphony environment? How can our clients use it to power their business? How can we help them be more efficient and avoid mistakes by using the systems, the capture, the analysis? And how can we continue to be at the forefront of making people communicate, or allowing them to communicate better and faster? So I'd say, looking at the product direction, it is around building in analytics, ensuring that the directory is really useful. So we have about 600,000 different financial services professionals on our directory, and allowing people to make sure that they know they can contact each other and use that in a trusted environment. It's very powerful, and it's going to become more important as we have more fakes with AI. So that's a key part of our strategy. And then, as I said, the interoperation and solving workflow problems for our clients.
That latter one, 20 years ago, back when I was a bit more closely involved in telecoms, the telecom side, than I am now, that's what we used to call CEBP, Communications Enabled Business Process. Such a no-brainer, a thing, because communications is still a vital part of any business process. So incorporating it into workflows is a natural thing to happen. But it's still not really seen still that much of it. It's great to hear that you see that still as a key thing. And maybe CEBP will have a comeback.
Yes, although it's a tricky acronym.
It's not the best.
I think I prefer workflows.
Workflows is a little bit easier, yeah. Maybe we'll talk about communications-oriented workflows or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, all communication is two things, really. It's data, and then it's an interaction. So there's generally, at the moment at least, there's a human element in our communication. That's going to change going forward. But there's also data at its core. That's what communication is. So that's why I like to think of it as solving problems, boosting efficiency, and helping workflows.
It's interesting to me as well how, looking at you as a network, Symphony as a network, so you started out as an internal-only comms system, I believe. Federation came later, I guess with scale, and with success comes a need to have a wider communication base. And you mentioned, you were talking about trust and knowing whether or not I'm talking to a bot or talking to a human and that sort of thing. And I imagine within a Symphony environment, it's probably a bit easier to police that, right? If I'm just communicating with a phone number in some other country, it's harder for me to know what's at the other end of that. Whereas if I'm talking to something on an endpoint, a Symphony endpoint, it's probably going to be easier in the future for you to be able to validate that it's a human.
Yes, that's the idea. So the other thing that you mentioned, telephone calls, and at least you have someone's voice, which is fairly rich for information, although it can be faked more easily now with AI. The other thing that people use and rely on a massive amount that is very insecure and so much more able to be faked is email. And that's an open platform, basically. And you have no idea of the security. We know all about phishing, of course, which is email technique for fraud. So with Symphony, it is verified because we have corporate customers and they're the ones that put their individuals onto the system. So that's the number one aspect of verification. And there's a control level, so you can talk within Symphony organization to organization. So I can message you, Dean, even though you're not a Symphony employee, I can message you on Symphony. And my administrator, well, that's actually me at Symphony, is one of them, but you can set controls. I could say that all of my personnel are able to talk to the Umony team, but I could also say, actually, all of my personnel are not able to talk to this other business for whatever reasons if we need information barriers. So actually, you can set those barriers very fine-grained if you want to. So there is a lot of control there. And you also have the knowledge that, say, if you're talking to someone from Citi, that Citi has put that person on the Symphony platform.
Interesting. And this has nothing to do with Symphony, but I just wonder whether the rest of the communications world, so standard telephony, needs to catch up with that type of thinking in terms of access control. At the moment, as you say, the phone world is like email. And in fact, you can guess phone numbers. I mean, I could dial any random number and probably get through to somebody. So there's absolutely zero access control. I wonder whether that's a big gap where the telephony world needs to catch up. It's maybe not something you can answer because it's nothing to do with Symphony.
It's an interesting one. So when you have telephone numbers given out, which is normally centrally controlled by the national authority, so the PSTN, Public Switching Telephony Network,
Well done.
is controlled by each national government, as you know. In China, for example, they require a very large amount of identity verification to the government before they will authorize a phone number to be given to an individual, whereas in other countries, you don't need to give anything at all. And it's partly an almost philosophical view as to what is this communication network for. Should it be more identity oriented and require verification, or should it just be a tool that anyone can use? That's an interesting philosophical question.
They have, there's a service in the US you can have now, I've forgotten the name of it, where a company can prove to the regulators ownership of a number or a range of phone numbers. And most of the smartphones now, I believe certainly iOS and Android, have the ability, using this mechanism, I'm not sure technically exactly how it works, I've seen it in action, where it will actually display a logo. So if a number belongs to Wells Fargo, when that user makes a call on my iPhone, it will actually show almost like a verified badge. It'll show Wells Fargo's logo on my screen as part alongside the caller ID, which I think is an interesting step towards that. Not secured, verified caller ID.
Yeah, well, you and I probably get so many spam calls in any one day that it would be welcome if there was a way of stopping that. And I'm sure you get a lot of spam emails, but at least your system will probably filter them all out.
It's silent. That's the nice thing about the spam emails. And actually, yeah, you're right. The email filtering systems are actually pretty good. So we're both protected from that quite well. It's not the same for phone calls.
No.
Unfortunately, I have no idea. And you never know, is it important? It's hard.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are you free markets or are you more control? But in the Symphony world, I would say that we're very much in favour of each organisation having complete control, and that's a real bonus for people that use our services.
Again, maybe there's also a big difference between business and consumer. Yeah. I think in the business world, most people would vote for control, certification of knowing who I'm talking to. Can you validate for me that it's a human? That's going to be the hard one. Almost need that sort of Turing test for real-time comms. Validate it's a human I'm talking to. It's going to be tricky in the future.
So, but you raise an interesting point, because both of our organisations do is bridge the gap between the business world and a consumer communication tool. Whether it be using Symphony to contact end clients on WhatsApp, for example, or on the telephone, and to be able to talk to your retail customer, your consumer, using that tool. And so we bridge both of those gaps. One of the things that we do that is important to our clients, and I think important to the end user, is there's always a notification that says you are receiving a message through WhatsApp from a person via Symphony or from an HSBC representative or whoever it might be. And I know that you build that into your products as well, so that there's that transparency. That could be another way to go for consumers, is to build in more pre-information and options to send the call away. Anyway, that's the way that we, and together collectively, we broach that gap between business level control and information and then reaching out to the end consumer.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's two things there. There's one, the responsibility of the comms providing party to validate that this person is who they say it is. So the caller ID, if you like, for old school term, is valid, verified. And then the second one is around providing the other party, the recipient, with the controls around what to do with calls from that person, either now or always block or send a voicemail or whatever it may be. I think there's sort of two things there, which those controls are definitely something that I think we can improve on for the industry.
So we've seen a lot of big eye-catching outages in the last 2 to 3 years, in fact. So we've seen AWS go down. We've seen a lot of airlines not be able to function because some of their technology providers have failed. And the effect on the broader economy and people's everyday lives can be really huge. And people are concerned about this. I also think that some of these outages are going to become more common because we have geopolitical factors, meaning that we probably have some state actors disrupting these key parts of our economy and our day-to-day lives. So people say, what can we do to stop this happening again? How do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our homes, our businesses, our finance? And I think that's quite a complicated question. What do you think the answers are, Dean?
I don't know what the answers are. It would be great to have the answer. I think, as you say, given certain geopolitical things happening at the moment, there are very likely state actors at play here. And I've always felt if your not enemy, what's the word? If your threat actor is a state, good luck. If you're just a corporation, the state is extremely likely to win, just by nature of scale, funding that they have, capabilities that they have, abilities to operate in covert ways, which corporations can't really defend against very easily. While we've been recording this, with the Cloudflare outage we've just heard has just been announced. So Zoom is down and OpenAI is down. So as you are alluding to, it feels like it's becoming a more common occurrence. It certainly has done over the last year or two, which feels closely aligned with the geopolitical events that are happening at the moment. So you have to question if there's state actors here. And like I say, I think if that is the case, I'm not sure what many corporations can do to defend against that. So ultimately, I feel that defense barrier has to go back one step and become national.
Interesting. I would suggest that, so we do have a big reliance on certain systems, and that's been recognised with all the operational resiliency regulations. They focus on resiliency. I think it is important for us to have alternative providers as a backup. And I think for any individual business, institution, you not just have to have resiliency, you also need to have your plan. What do you do if things go down? And that plan B, or we could even call it preparedness, is really an important next phase. So after your resiliency, you've then got to have preparedness for a complete outage, a long-lasting outage, or an interconnected systems outage. And how do you deal with that? And it won't necessarily be a perfect thing, it's back up like that, but you just need to have some understanding of what you would do in those circumstances. And I think that's the next phase that we need to get to.
I can see a certification standard around that from a resilience point of view. How good is your disaster recovery? I mean, there are already obviously DR plans, but I think you're talking about a deeper level of DR resilience.
So a lot of the BCP, the business continuity plans, and the DR disaster recovery plans, they're quite old and they focus on a physical problem, such as your office building being unavailable, or maybe even now something like an epidemic. But they don't necessarily focus on preparedness for a very large IT, for want of a better description.
A submarine cable being cut.
Yeah. And we don't have preparedness for that. And so that's, I think, the next phase for people to focus on is that level of preparedness. How would you get things back up? Where is the data? What do you need to try to get things up and running and functioning again? Can you rehearse it, not in a practical way, but in a tabletop way? just circling back to DORA, it has a new concept in it, which no regulation has ever required before, which is something called TLPT, threat-led penetration testing, which is required as directed by a regulator on systems, and it's on the production environment, which means the actual live environment, and there have to be at least 3 attack vectors. So it's not just one sort of denial of service check. It's probably denial of service. It's probably some kind of a phishing check and
social,
something else. So that's a really interesting one. Again, that's testing on live production environment. It's never been done before from a regulatory perspective. It is, I would say, concerning for industry, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out. So I'm just tying that around into actual testing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's a good question on testing, because we at Symphony, we get a third-party pen tester, penetration tester. We get a third-party pen test every year, and they can write a report which can be available to clients on an asked-for basis. So that's another thing about testing. As you were talking about, the pen testing is another area where we're getting more into the do it regularly. How good are your testers? That is another question. Again, there's no real industry standard, as far as I'm aware, for pen testing, but DORA will potentially bring that up to higher focus.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. We do the same. So we have an annual pen test as well, and I think that's that trust has, in terms of, I agree with you. I don't think that there's a certification for pen testing. We'll double check that in the. If that's wrong, we'll let people know. But I think it's you build up a relationship with the pen test companies that you use. We use a couple of different ones, and what we've always tried to do is to give them slightly more access than the public really have. So we actually make it slightly easier for them, because if there is an issue, we want it uncovered. I think the more interesting one to me is this new trend of red teaming, which is where you have someone attack you effectively unannounced, very unstructured, frequently against production environments. I'm not sure we'd quite go that far, but I know a lot of companies will do that on their production environment, and that's also it's a way of beefing up your testing.
Yeah, and so DORA has a very detailed set of regulations about the TLPT, the threat-led pen testing, and there is a blue team, a red team, and a purple team.
What's the purple team do?
The purple team is effectively both the subject of the test and the tester. Certain personnel come together and can set the test parameters or look at risk mitigants. They can be there if the pen testing is going to be too disastrous. They can call it off. That's my understanding.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting.
It's for anyone that likes this area, it's worth having a look at the detailed regulations for TLPT under DORA.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. And I would say also for anyone in engineering now looking for a career path, I actually think pen testing, TLPT testing, red, blue, purple teaming is actually a really interesting career path.
For sure. And it's potentially something that may not be able to ever be taken over by AI, because you really need a
human
brain. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because, well, I mean, that's a good question. It's still humans at the moment behind all of these attacks, one way or another, using very sophisticated tools. Would you ever, I hope we would never get to a situation where an AI system might decide to go rogue and start attacking different environments.
I don't think we'll see an AI system decide to go rogue, but I think we will see AI systems deployed as rogue agents by rogue actors. That's what I think is likely. And so, it's to catch a thief, use a thief, I think is why we were both thinking it's a human thing for a while yet. But actually, as the attack agents maybe become more and more AI-based, maybe you need another AI to catch the AI one. So I don't know, we'll see. Fascinating time to be alive.
Yes, so if you're interested in pen testing, make sure you also understand AI
use. You need that too.
That is interesting.
If a listener at a technology or compliance department within a bank wants to take one concrete step towards more secure, trusted communications, what would you recommend that they do?
Focus on control and security of whoever is providing the communication service to you. Do you have control to a good degree over how it is provided and how you can set things up? And look at the security of what is being provided to you. So do check carefully the security. They're my 2 steps. I know it's not 1. I slightly cheated.
Even better. Corinna, thank you.
You're welcome.
If you've made it this far, you've watched through the whole thing, thank you for that. Please click the like and subscribe button and we'll see you soon.